Hi everyone, this is Carl Groves. I'm going to do a training of the Tenon UI, the Tenon dub. We consider this the basic training. The full hardcore API training would be a separate training that you can find elsewhere. So my first step here is I'm going to go to client sign in. When I click on that sign in, I'm taken to the sign in page. Obviously, if you don't have an account, you're going to need to create one. This training assumes that you already have an account. I'm going to log in here. This is just a demo user account. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and clean up some stuff too. Okay, good. We only have one project. So a couple of things here. I'm going to go back to the dashboard, give you sort of a lay of the land in the UI. Now, when you first register for Tenon, you're not going to see these charts and graphs and all that sort of information. You'll see some yellow bars that say something along the lines of, welcome to Tenon to do some testing. You'll see some data here, something like that. So at the top here, this thing we're going to refer to as test now, as you'll be able to see shortly. That's because you can use that to test now. That's what that name implies. Underneath that is the little user menu, just a couple of quick links there to take you to various places. But the important links are over on the left. A couple of other things to note is that over on the left, in the left-hand side navigation bar, there's two groups of navigation links. There are links at the top. They're dashboard, history, test queue, projects, report generator, and shared reports. Those are all things relating to testing. And of course, relating to things that can be done with the API as well. That's another thing to think about those links. The links on the bottom, however, are not things that can be done with the API, but are user profile kind of things. So I'm going to go through these first, actually, because from a product usage perspective, there's a couple of things to do first when you start getting into Tenon. Now, some of the things, by the way, that you'll do with Tenon might require you to have your API key. So if you click on that, you'll get your API key shown to you. If you need a new API key, you can click that button that says generate a new API key. And so when you do that, what'll happen is it'll generate a new API key. It will completely destroy your old API key. So if you generate a new API key and you have it, plugged into some other integration that you're using, and there's lots of them, it's going to make that stuff not work until you use your new API key. Next thing I'll do, though, now that I'm here, I'm at the settings page. I'll actually click over here to accountant settings, and you'll see what I mean. This is just a landing page for all of our settings, and I'll go through each of these. So account settings, this is going to be settings relating to how you use the Tenon website, the Tenon.io user interface. So the refresh rate here, there's certain Ajax-driven pieces of content that are available from a long polling aspect where that'll refresh the content in a certain period of time. It's set to 1 second, but you can change that if you want, especially if you're a screen reader user. You may want to be able to slow that down so you can consume the content. User interface language, date format, time zone, these are all things that you can use to modify how things display for you, like number format. A couple of other things, mailing list preferences. Do you want to subscribe to mailing list? Do you want to subscribe to system updates? Those are checkboxes. You can turn those on and off. Next up are two options. Can we have your consent to collect anonymous statistics and test verification? And the next one is, would you like to participate in our test verification program? Yes and no are your options there as well. There is a link here for our test verification terms of use. If you choose to utilize that feature, you'll want to read that terms of use. So that's really quickly for our account settings. Password, very obviously, allows you to modify your password. Billing would allow you to modify your billing information, including like whatever credit card we have on file for you. Subscription would allow you to see your subscription if you have one. Because my demo account just has a big pile of API calls. I don't have a subscription here. Messages and notifications is an archive of all the messages that we've sent to you. So if you do in your settings, if you have unsubscribed to these system updates, we'll just archive those for you here. And this has all of our emails that we had sent you in the past. Site monitors, I'm going to skip for now. Edit address is your physical address. This would be for your billing address, really. And then the next two are really important. Two links for settings that are very specific to improving and changing how you do your testing. I'm actually going to do these a little bit backwards. So I'm going to do test settings first. Test settings lists every single test that the Tenon product has in the system. So you'll see here a big long list of tests. Each test has its test ID. That's that number there for here for its number 3. And the test issue title, that's the title that you'll see in your results when you get results that have violated that test. And underneath that is a quick description of the test logic. This says automated test to check for a lang attribute on the HTML element. Finally, underneath that is going to be what the certainty score is and which WCAG success criteria apply for that test. As I said before, every single test is listed here. You'll notice also there's no 1 and 2. There's no 8. There's no 11. There's no 14. The reason why these skip around a little bit is because this is the test number in the system. And in those cases, those tests, a long time ago at this point, were removed, probably because they were either giving us false positives, or there was a bug in the test, or there was something else that we probably changed or just replaced it with something else. Now, what's cool about this is that you can turn on or off tests here in this page. So, for instance, for demo purposes, I have test number 5 turned off. I can enable it by checking that checkbox and then scrolling all the way down and hitting the submit settings button. Now my test settings are saved, and now, as we can see here, that is checked, and that will be a test that will now get run when I run tests from the system. Next up are the API settings. Now, keeping in mind, of course, that the page that we're on is we're on our user settings, our user API settings. So this API settings for our entire account. This page here allows you to set defaults for how the API tests are going to be run. This actually dictates all of the testing. So all of your tests, even if you never use the API directly, the test settings will be listed. The API settings will be listed here. Now, if you ever forget anything that I'm about to say, that's fine. This link here says understanding Tenon API request parameters, and it lists all of the request parameters that you're going to be taking a look at here. This is version 1 of the API is what we're seeing here. Version 2 of the API is not yet integrated into how things work with the UI. So this is API version 1 settings. There will be changes, actually not any differences for what we see here, but there will be additions to new API settings for API version 2. I'm going to go through each one of these items here to discuss what they are. You can feel free to just leave these as they are if you want to. The default settings are perfectly fine, but I will explain what they are so you know what they do and how they work. The first API request parameter that is shown here is certainty. In Tenon, all of these tests that we just looked at a moment ago have this score here that says certainty. And a lot of them, as you can see, are 100% certainty. This one is 60%. And this one is 80%. And this one is 60%. So some of them have a different amount of certainty to them. And what certainty is really is it's our idea of whether this test will result in us finding something that's a real problem 100% of the time or not. So every test has a certainty score, and the vast majority of them are in this 100% range. Things that have less than that much certainty could be either very subjective or they could be irrelevant based on certain conditions. The example that I always give has to do with alternative text for images. I can tell you with 100% certainty whether you have a text alternative that's actually tied to the image, it's programmatically labeling the image. I can tell you that with 100% certainty. What I can't do with 100% certainty is tell you whether that text alternative is good or not. So we have a test, for instance, I think it's test 72 or 75, one of those in the 70s, that looks for very long alt attributes. And a very long alt attribute might be something that's about 300 characters or more. And if you think about what 300 characters would be, that's a couple of sentences. That's like at least 2 or 3 sentences. So an alt attribute that long might be the kind of thing that you should consider either simplifying or putting it in the main body of the content. But I can't be 100% sure that that's the case. Let's say you're a museum. If you're a museum, then that long alt attribute is really appropriate in a lot of cases. So that's why that test has lower certainty. So the way you can use certainty is, basically, let's say you're using it because you're using Tenon and you're new to accessibility, or you're working on websites that are already pretty bad and get a lot of issues. You can dial up certainty to be 100% certain. That way you're not having to deal with some of those subjective items. Or you could do the exact opposite. Let's say you already know accessibility rather well and you want to know about everything that Tenon can possibly test for, and you're fine with dealing with the subjectivity. Set it to 0. That's fine. And of course, you can set it anywhere in between. In reality, the vast majority of them don't go below 40% anyway. We did have some tests that were 20% certainty, but they were just too noisy. So 40% is pretty much going to be the lowest you'll expect to see anyway. Priority is a little bit different because we do see the 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 that we saw under certainty, but this is a lot more sensitive. The priority score for each result, we'll see in a moment when I show you the test results. But the priority is ranked. When you have all your issues come back from the test engine, every one of those issues is going to be ranked from 100 on down. And the idea behind priority is that it lets you know which things are the most important to fix first. Basically, anything that has 100% priority is the things that need to be fixed pretty urgently, and everything below that, of course, is ranked accordingly. Now, that's really a really powerful tool, and I've seen a lot of times where we'll have a customer who actually focuses on priority, and they rerun the page over and over and over to get the new things that bubble up, and that's a really great strategy. What you probably don't want to do is you probably don't want to go to 100% priority, because that's going to filter out a lot of things that are important. If you are new to Tenon and your system is bad, it has a lot of accessibility errors, set this to 80 and that'll be fine. It'll let you focus on things. It'll let you reduce the noise that's kind of inherent to accessibility testing tools, which is great. But understand that what you're doing with priority is actually filtering out legitimate issues, especially if you have 100% certainty. You're really using this as a filter to reduce the noise. So keep in mind that use case. In normal situations, I just recommend leaving priority to 0, but it's a great use case to set it to 80 if you're new to accessibility and you just want to focus. It's a really good thing. Next up is WCAG level. As you hopefully know, the WCAG level is the level from the WCAG standard. If you're not familiar, that's fine. I'll explain really quickly. WCAG levels can be A, AA, or AAA. And what that means is it's the conformance level that you're going to adhere to. Now, I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time describing, what goes into those things, but most companies, when they're doing accessibility testing, are focused at the AA level. Just so you know, the AA level includes all of the AA things and all of the A things. And also all the AAA contains AAA, AA, and A. So that's the way that works. You can focus on A if you'd like to, but keep in mind that your company might want to stick with AA for its conformance requirements. The next option is storing results, whether you want to store results. What we mean by that is basically whether you want to keep your reports on the Tenon system or whether you're just going to test and fix and test and fix, or maybe use the API directly or something like that. I'll tell you why this exists. There are certain industries, especially banking, where they have additional regulatory requirements that prevent them from storing content on third-party services like Tenon. So we introduced this feature for them. And if you hit no for storing results, what it means is that we don't store anything. And the kind of downside to that is you don't get reports and all the fancy charts and graphs and long-term trends and all that sort of thing. It does assume that you're consuming the API directly. So unless you have a very strong reason to turn result storage off, I would just leave it to yes. Next up is fragment. Fragment is something you shouldn't worry about here at the user account level. Just say no. But just so you know what that means, it's whether you're testing parts of pages or not. And so generally speaking, most people are going to leave this to no. If you test parts of pages, you might do that at a project level or even at the request level. So leave it no here is totally fine. Next setting is user agent string. The user agent string used to be a way that websites would detect what browser that the user was using and maybe change some of the things on the page based upon what the user is using. But these days, it's not terribly useful anymore, not something that people use a lot. And so we don't recommend changing this to anything unless you have a specific reason to. I'll give you one example why you might want to change this. We had a customer who used the Tenon spider a lot. So you had, as we'll talk about in the project section, you have the ability to spider a web page or website rather. And that means we crawl through each page on the site and gather the pages and then test each one as it finds them. Now the spider, it doesn't work too fast, so it's not going to be like a denial of service, but it still might be fast enough that your security software might flag it as a potential bot and sort of try to block it. Another thing that can happen is that the more you spider your site, the more you see the potential for us to sort of skew your statistics. For instance, the Tenon SaaS system is held on servers in New York City. So you may all of a sudden start seeing a whole pile of traffic from New York City in your traffic analytics, and that's not a great idea. So what we have seen some customers change this value to do something like, call it just -Tenon. That'll allow the folks with that are managing the analytics reporting to filter out anything that has that -Tenon in it. It's really the only truly useful thing. If you want to talk about doing mobile testing, it's probably way better to do something like change the viewport size. So the viewport size right here, this option list allows you to select different viewports for the headless browser that Tenon uses. This is awesome. So because we use a headless browser, we can dictate the viewport size. We can change it from a desktop size to a phone size to a tablet or whatever. Again, keeping in mind that we're in our user settings, so we're at the topmost settings hierarchy. You want to keep it as something desktop. I use 1440 by 900 on this because that's just what my current browser is, and so that's what I want to test against. But you can change it to something more appropriate to 1280 by 1024, which is kind of right there in the range where a person who's low vision might set their viewport size to be. So that would be fine. Keep it something desktop here, and then I'll show you how to change it at the project level in a moment. Once I'm satisfied with my changes to the settings, hit the submit settings button, and there we go. So now I'm ready to start testing. I can go back here to my dashboard, and I can use this thing called Test Now. One thing to note is that Test Now always goes against your default project. So if you were to, let's say you want to test a handful of specific URLs and you want to put them in a special project, you're going to have to change which one is your default project. So I will describe how to do that in a moment. For now, I want to just show you what testing looks like. And this is just a page at a time type testing. We'll obviously go over spidering and things like that in a moment. But here I am at the top of the home page. I'm at this form field that says test. We call Test Now. I can put either a URL or I can put HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in here. So the product doesn't require a URL. You can, without a doubt, just go ahead and test however you want it, however you want. But I'm going to just put a URL in here. So I'm going to do https://www.google.com. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that Analyze button. What's happening right now is the Tenon product has made a request to the API. The API starts up a headless browser. It injects a big pile of JavaScript, which is our JavaScript, of course. And then it's going to use that JavaScript to subject the website, the homepage for google.com, to a series of heuristic checks, and then comes back with JSON. And comes back with some JSON. We take that JSON and we turn it into this UI. All of the test results, whether it's immediate testing or whether it's test history stuff, is going to look like this. So if I go into test history, what's going to happen is it's going to load up my pages that I've tested. Here we have all of my results. It tells me how long ago that I ran some tests. It tells me all that. Each one of these has a delete button to delete those results, or view results is another button I can hit. If I hit view results, as we can see, this is exactly the same layout that we saw from before. So that's really cool. We can narrow that down based on projects, by the way. We can change the projects that I want to see the test history for, and so on and so forth. So that's really cool. Now, let's take a look at what we see here. First off, we see that there are 37 issues found for that page. Tells us what page we tested, which is google.com. We saw that a second ago. It shows us how long it took to process. So that was 2.24 seconds. What the screen size was, which was my 1440 by 900, and how big the page was. Now, the process thing is kind of important. The Tenon product is pretty fast, but you also got to keep in mind that we are testing basically every node in the DOM. So the bigger the page, the longer that might take to test. We're always working on trying to get that to speed up a bit, but it is what it is. We are doing a full load of the page and a full test of each DOM node. And some of the DOM nodes we're testing multiple times. So keep that part in mind. When you're doing a spider job, we'll see in a minute, when you're doing a spider job, the spider is pretty quick, the testing is pretty quick. And so the more testing you do at a given time, the faster it tends to go. That's just because we're able to make multiple requests at a time. On a page at a time basis, I've seen this be as long as 20 seconds on really bad pages. There is a button here that I can use to download a CSV file. So I can download this CSV file and and then share it with others or something like that. The CSV file is going to have all of the issue data on it that we're seeing here. It's just in a CSV format. Next up, in the middle area here is a chart. It's a there's our CSV file that has all our data on it. Next up in the middle here is the percentage of issues per criteria for the page. So we see here, for instance, this test 272, whatever that is 16 accounts for 16% of the issues on that page. So you can see that. The other one here is called density. Density is an important metric in terms of understanding actual performance. So the way density works is it's basically how many issues exist on the page as measured against how big the page is, how much source code is in it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we found 37 issues here on google.com, on the Google homepage, or we test up the CNN homepage, and that's 37 issues. Which one is worse? Hopefully you think, or you understand, that the Google homepage would be worse than the CNN homepage because CNN has a lot more stuff on it. So if a big page like CNN only has 37 issues and a little page like google.com only has 37 issues, clearly the Google page is worse because it has a lot more stuff. That's kind of what density looks at. So 6% density, it's actually not bad. If you were to take a look at this and you were to see 50% density, that's really bad. Once you're in that area of 50% density, anecdotally, what we see is that that's a case where a user is going to have actually pretty big problems using that page. So just keep that in mind. 6%, not terrible. 37 issues seems like a lot, but compared with a lot of other pages out there, it's not that bad. But the part that you're here for is this table. This table shows us all of the issues that were found, and it's in a 2-column table. The left column always shows us the code that had the problem. The right column shows us the details for those issues. So this very first issue we see here is, it says this image is missing a text alternative. That happens to be test ID 9. So if you remember going through our test settings from before, that's what test ID 9 looks at, is whether the image has an alt attribute or not. We expose that test ID for an important reason, and that is if you have a result that you think is not correct, either false positive or a buggy test of some kind, let us know. Give us that piece of code, give us the test ID, shoot us an email, let us know. There's also another really cool feature in here that I'll talk to you about in a moment, about how we crowdsource our quality of our tests. Okay, on the right-hand side in the description, we have at the top whether it's an error or a warning. Now, the error is driven by the test certainty. Any test with 100% certainty is going to be logged as an error. Anything with less than 100% certainty is going to be logged as a warning, and that's based on that certainty and the subjectivity of things that I talked about before. Priority, as I mentioned a moment ago, is a ranked score. So every test is going to have a couple of factors that contribute to the what we call the raw priority score. And then when the test results come back, they're ranked according to that raw priority score. And the thing that has the highest raw priority score has 100%, and everything that has lower raw priority score is ranked against its percentage of that thing. So we can see here, 100% priority here, 100% here, 91 there. So it gives you a clear idea of which items should be fixed first. Next up is the issue title. The issue title should be very easy to understand regarding what the problem is. It should be very clear to know the exact nature of the problem and very plain language. Next under that is the XPath. This is the absolute XPath of that issue, of that code rather, that had the issue. So if we were to load up the Google homepage and we were to paste that into DevTools, it should bring that thing into view. Next up, the standard that was violated, in this case, WCAG 2.0, level A, 1.1.1. Underneath that is the issue description. Issue description is a more long-form description of what the issue is and why it's an issue. And again, this should be very easy to understand. Each one of these has a very strict structure in terms of what it must contain. The first thing that it must contain is the issue statement, or the problem statement, rather. The problem statement is often very close or identical to the issue title, but it's very clear about what the issue is. This image is missing a text alternative. The next thing in this pattern is the problem statement. The problem statement is why it's an issue. So in this case, it describes why this is a problem for people. It says images without a text alternative often confuse users of assistive technologies. If you do not supply a text alternative, users who cannot see the image will not understand the meaning that the image is intended to convey. Finally, the last part is the recommended fix, or the remediation guidance. And this says, add an alt attribute to the image element. For meaningful images, the value of the alt attribute should be a concise description of the image's purpose or content. For purely decorative images, the value of the alt attribute should be blank. So that's it in a nutshell. That's the whole issue description and the title and all that sort of stuff. By the way, for those of you who may be working towards integrating the Tenon API into something else, all of the information that I just described to you, and more actually, comes in the API response. So you don't have to go to another system to gather this data. It's right there. But another thing that is there is a link to this, to what we call the best practices details page. The best practice details page shows you all of the details around what that test is about and all the problems that all the information on understanding the problem and how to fix it. So the best practice details page at the very top provides us with what's known as the best practice. That's just our goal. That's what we're aiming for, is to adhere to this best practice. Underneath that is our test logic description. So this is the actual test we failed. And as you saw before, this is test ID 9. And test ID 9 has this description around what the test logic does. Underneath that is remediation guidance. Remediation guidance is that, recommended fix stuff that we talked about before. Next to that is the prioritization scoring. It tells you the contributing factors to its priority score. It has a high user impact. It has a low repair speed. Actually, it should say fast. The impact on the interface is none. That gives it a raw priority score of 67. And again, when that number 67 is measured against all the other raw scores, that's why this one got 100%, because it had the highest raw priority score. Next up is verification data. This is actually part of a new feature to Tenon, and also because I'm on my demo instance, that's why this has a 0% verification score. But it's part of a really cool feature. So I'm going to open a new window and go to the Tenon.io website and show you this in action. I'm going to go to verifier.php. If you recall from your settings, under account settings, there were two sets of radio buttons around whether you want to consent to anonymous statistics and also whether you want to participate in the verification program. Customers can earn free API credits by verifying the test results. Obviously, the test results have to be from someone who's opted into that anonymous statistics. So there's nothing we're not exposing customer information unless, of course, they wanted to use it for this purpose. But this is really cool. Now we have, we've been presented with a form here, and it shows us the failing code here, and it gives us the issue description. And then we got to determine, like, okay, is this a real problem? So this says this image is missing a text alternative. We can see here from the failing code example that is true. There is no text alternative on here. So I'm going to say yes to whether this is an issue, an accurate issue. And I hit submit. That goes into the database. It tells us that that this has been verified, and one more credit. I can just keep going. Now, if a user says that that's not accurate, or they're not sure, then what happens is they can enter a description about this issue, hit the submit button. They'll still earn their API credit, and it'll create an issue in our issue tracking system to let us know that a test verification user had found what we think might be a bug. So that's really cool. Some scoring there. Code samples, this is what it looks like to fail. This is what it looks like to pass. Description of the impacted populations, reference information, and standards information. All of that is on this best practice details page. So with that, let's go over here and let's talk about a couple of the things that we saw. First off, again, this link to the history, as we saw before, is going to give us a list of all the pages that we had tested. So that'll take a little bit of time to load up. It'll show us all the pages that were tested. Test queue is going to show us a list of all the pages that are in our test queue. Typically, that would be something that's in a Spider job or something like that. And then next is projects. So let's go into projects and take a look at what projects are and talk about creating some projects. So I'm going to hit add a new project, and I'm taken to this page, and I want to give it a name. So I'm going to do a spider job. So I'll call this CNN Spider. Give it a description. This is the kind of thing, it's like commenting your code. Like, give it a good description, because you may not remember when you come back to this, like, what the heck was it that I was testing? So I'll give it a quick description. Next up is project type. There are 3 project types. So you should expect this part to change very soon. One project type that we're going to talk about is a site monitor. It's not in this location yet, but you should expect that that's going to change pretty soon. Right now, there's API and Spider, and like I said, the site monitor type, I'm selecting Spider though. When I select Spider, the options on the page change, and I get the Spider options. Now, the Spider right now is pretty simplistic. It's going to just take a domain, and I'm going to actually do star.cnn.com. I like to use star because it's a greedy match. If you know your Boolean operators, that's called a greedy match. It's a star.cnn.com. I got to give it a starting URL. Typically, that's going to be your homepage, but it doesn't have to be. Some people use their sitemap as well. www.cnn.com is what I'm going to start. Next up is going to be your limit. Now, I have 9,990 API calls in my account, so that's the upper limit of what I can test for. Frankly speaking, you really don't want to test every page of your site unless you're trying to get just a quick report on your overall compliance. If you're trying to find the problems on your page, you should probably Spider a lot less. And think through sort of how big your site is, and I would even recommend using a sample size calculator, a statistical sample size calculator for any kind of testing. It'll save you some money versus using up all your API calls. For me, this is just a demo, so I'm going to put 50 in there. Next up is project level API settings. So we saw these before. These fields look very familiar. This is for my project, this particular project. And what you see here is I have inherited all of my settings from before. I shouldn't have to change any of these, which is why they're hidden by default. But if you want to change any of them, if you want to say, well, give me AAA or something like that, totally fine. I set that setting here. I hit submit the project. And now my new project is created with my changed setting. All the other settings were inherited from this. Another thing that we see here is the project card has been created. It started out, if you were paying attention, it started out with one queued test. It grabs that first URL and then it spiders it. And as you can see here, we're already at 50 queued tests. Pretty soon, what we're going to start seeing is that this test sessions is going to be available, and it's going to show us the URLs that were tested and how many. But I'm going to, while we're waiting on that, I'm going to do another thing. I'll do what I'll call this. I'll call this my new URLs, known URLs project. And I'll give it a description, a test of 269 URLs I already knew. So in this case, I have, like I said, 269 URLs that I already know about. And what I'm going to do here is just pull up a text file of URLs. So this is just a list of URLs. Now, in my opinion, this approach is much better than testing using the spider. Now, it just so happens that this is still every page on my site. But the truth is that, as you can see here, that site's a blog, and I don't really need to test every single page if I'm trying to figure out whether the templates are good or bad. Especially this thing here, the pagination stuff. You know, I could probably dump a bunch of those things because it's all the same. It's just lists of blog entries. Couple of things to note about this field, though. It can take whatever garbage you want to put in there. That's fine. You do not have to have each URL on a new line as long as there's a space in between them. That's fine. You can put a comma between them too. It doesn't matter. The Tenon spider or the Tenon projects API knows the difference between what's a URL and what isn't. So there we go. The other thing I can do, by the way, while I'm here is I can also use a sitemap URL. If you have what's known as an XML sitemap, you can just put that there and that would populate it as well. But we're going to dump our URLs in there, and I'm going to hit submit project. So there we go. My known URLs are populated in there. I can also, by the way, I do want to talk about the default project. So my new default, what I can do is you have to have a default project. There's no way around it. You have to have the default project because that's how that test now thing works. And it's also a convenience thing. You can use the API without passing in a project value. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to click this checkbox that says, make this my default project. I click on that, hit submit project. My new default is there. You can see here that can't be deleted. And then I can just delete that project, the old one. But I'm not going to do that because I want to use the report data from here. Finally, let's talk about the site monitor situation. Site monitor. Site monitors are really awesome. We have separate videos around site monitors because of the richness of features that they offer. It definitely warrants taking a look at. If you're attending this training and anything that I say is really interesting around site monitors, that's awesome. We will help you become much more successful and adept at using site monitors anytime you want. It is very tricky to get right sometimes. So what I did, though, is I created a site monitor project. It was just an API type project that's empty. Now I'm going over to account and settings, and I'm gonna go over here to site monitors. So like I said, that whole workflow thing is going to change pretty soon. And this process will be part of the project record. So keep that in mind, that if you're on our mailing list, you'll get alerted to when that happens. All right, so we're on the site monitor page. And again, there's documentation here. I heartily recommend you reading it, especially because there's actually a lot cooler stuff that you can do on a site monitor that I'm not even going to touch on, including, for instance, just passing in the exact source you want to test. So there we go. But we're going to go through a couple of use cases here. The first one is I want to test only new pages. So I'll call this my monitor one. We can add a URL here. Not really going to do a whole lot. It's there again for your purposes. And then I'm going to select the project I want to track these results in. And that's going to be my site monitor project. So this says test only new pages, yes or no. I'm going to leave it to yes, and then I'm going to leave everything else alone for now to show you what this does. So I hit submit site. Now what happens is I'm redirected to the initial page, and we see this JavaScript snippet. So all I have to do is copy that JavaScript snippet and put it on the footer of my page at the bottom of the page, just like you would like old style Google Analytics or something like that. Just put it right before the closing body tag on your site, and what'll happen is pretty interesting. What's going to happen is every page of your site is going to get tested one time. And then anytime a new page to your site is added, that will get tested one time. So this is the kind of use case I could envision for this would be something where you already know your site's pretty good, but you have a lot of content that gets added to it from content management people, and you want to make sure that no new issues are introduced. That's kind of the use case for that one. Another one, though, would be my monthly monitor, maybe. So in this case, you want to test every page of your site once a month. Regardless of whether you fixed anything, it's going to just test every page. So again, I'm going to go here to Site Monitor. I'm going to say no to testing only new pages. And then here it says how long in seconds should we wait. So that is going to be 2,592,000 seconds. And then I hit Submit Site. So now I get a new snippet here. It's got the interval of 1 month. So every page on my site is going to get tested one time and then once a month thereafter. And actually more like 30 days thereafter. So keep that in mind. It's not going to be on the first of the month. It's going to be 30 days. One more use case. This will be, I don't know, my proactive monitor. How's that? Now I'm going to say, put it on that same thing. Only new pages, no. However, hash selector is going to be the same kind of thing as a hash or a selector in JavaScript. What that's going to do is we're going to take a look at that part of the page, and we're going to see if that content has changed. And if it's changed, we'll retest it. So I'll use my own site as an example. This is my personal site. And what I really want to do is I want to test every single page, every single blog page, just the content. So basically in this case, it's just going to be every single blog, not the rest of the template. So I'm going to go in here and I need to find a selector that I can tie that to. So I'm going to do main content, but not that section there, because that's got the right side bar. I just want the article content. So here we go. There it is. We'll do article. So that's going to be main article. Main content article. That's going to be the selector that I use to determine whether the page has changed. Basically, again, like I said, it'll test every single page of the site once. Then anytime that page content changes, it'll test it again. So this is a case where, let's say I test everything, I get a bunch of issues back, I fix those issues, I deploy the fixes, and then it's going to test it again. So that's really cool. So those are my primary test cases, or my primary use cases for monitors. So that's really awesome. Now that we've done all this stuff, let's take a look at some other things. I'm going to go back to projects, and I'm going to go to my default project here. I click on the name, and I'm taken to I'm going to be taken to the dashboard for that project. All of this information comes from what we call the Reports API. The Reports API allows you to get to pull down data from any part of the reporting data that we have in various different types of reports. So if I open up the documentation for that, you'll see we have a reports API. Basically, it's just they're all GET requests, and you enter in what kind of report that you want and what date ranges and all that sort of stuff, and you get JSON response back. There are 37 different types of reports, and right now we don't support every one of these just yet in the report generator, but we will, and we'll talk about the report generator in a second. The dashboard is just a pile of our favorites. So we can filter this data based on the project that we're on, which is going to be my default project. We can filter that based upon what project I'm on. We can filter that based on start date and end date. So if you wanted to get a snapshot, let's say a 1 week, like last week versus this week or something like that, you can modify the start dates. At the top is the summary table, and this comes from the summary report. It tells us how many distinct pages were tested, how many were successful. So we see here, this is one more than this one, 1028 and 1029. That's because total successful could count multiple tests at the same URL. So in here, I think that's probably the fact that I tested google.com twice. How many were unsuccessful? That would be pages that were 404 or something like that. Average issues per page, that's 204. We know from prior discussions that the raw issue count isn't quite as useful as the density. And so we'll see the density in a second. Average issue certainty is 100%. That's because that's what my projects are set to be. And then average issue priority is 100%. And that's not good because, again, that's a calculated value. So what we're seeing here is that a lot of those issues that we've seen are really important issues. Average page density, we talked about that. This means that the average page has 31% density. That's kind of creeping up there in the danger zone, but we'll take a look at some other metrics here in a second. Issue density here on the top left of this quad is a time series. So what you want, of course, is you want your issue density to be lower as time goes on. Unfortunately, because this is a demo account, I only have a couple of days of data here. But overall, if you're a heavy user, you would want to see this reduced as we go. Density distribution is my favorite, my absolute favorite of all of these charts, because it really does show us across our entire project here, because we had filtered based on our project, across the entire project, what's the density like for each page? We know we have 31% density, but how many, what's that look like in terms of each page? And what we see here is that a good majority of our pages, out of the total successful runs, 313 of those are 1 to 10% density, and that's pretty good in the real world. That's actually not bad at all. Looking scary as we get further, though. The more you go down, the higher the density, of course, over here. So there are 29 pages here that are 51 to 60% density. And as I mentioned very early in this training demo, that when you approach that 50%, you're starting to deal with real problems, serious problems for a user. We go beyond the frustration level of accessibility issues and definitely into the holy cow, there's real problems for users, and they're probably going to be unable to fix things. So, and we see here 100% density. 22 of those pages were over 100% density. That is not good. All right. Next up, issues by certainty. We talked about that again. All of my projects are set to be 100% certainty, so that's why that is a big bar there. Issues per page, very similar to the density thing. This shows us how many issues exist per page. Underneath that is a table called worst performing pages. This tells us out of all of the pages in our project, which ones are the worst. And density here is sortable. So that's the one I like to use. This page here at 235% density, that is not good at all. There's also warning density and total issues. Underneath that is issues by content category. So if I wanted to take a look at the specific issues oriented towards, one of these types of content, I could do that. So let's say I wanted to see tables. What'll happen is this is gonna do a big calculation on the tables and pull up all the issues for tables there. And we see here a very familiar layout, almost identical to the page issues, but in this case, we're seeing all the issues by a specific content category listed for us. So this could be multiple pages or it could be multiple tests as well. Now, I've actually already shared this. There would be a share button here as well, but I've already shared this. So I can copy this URL and I can share this with someone else. That person has to have a Tenon username and password. They need to be able to log in too. I can also export this report. If I click export, it's going to give me a CSV file of all of these issues. And that's the prevailing theme through the rest of the dashboard as well. Issues by test ID would be very similar. Oh, this is interesting, marquee element. So issues by test ID would give us the list of the issues for that particular test ID. And again, I can share the report. I can export the report. And then I go down further and I see issues by WCAG success criteria. We see here non-text content is listed here, and info and relationships, meaningful sequence. We'll click on that one. And there you go. Now, a really quick note here. You'll see here that it says not tested for a bunch of these. This is because the Tenon product does not seek to, and nor can it, test for every single WCAG success criteria. I mean, if you look here, 1.2.4 is about captions on live videos, and this is for audio description and sign language. So these are not the kind of things that a product like Tenon could even try to test anyway. So that's why it's not tested, and that's also why you should strongly consider also using our manual testing product, which is called Mortis. Well, we're not going to do any training on that one, of course, in this video because that's a different product. But that's why that's there. Issues by success criteria does show you all of the things that we do have tests for and all the things that we can test and whether there's issues. But we're also very clear that there's certain things that can't be tested. So that's the dashboard. The next thing I want to show you is the report generator. The report generator allows you to pull down data from any of the reports that we currently have available for us. Like I said, there's 37 different types of reports. This is a subset of those. It actually does cover a substantial amount of them, but I can pull down, let's say, issues by level, and then specific project, and I can even narrow it down by date. I click generate results, and then we see here the issues by level. I can go back to generate a new report. I can do something like page performance. Page performance will give us our issues per page. Listed here, 204 issues per page average here. Oh, sorry, that was issues per page. But page performance is the one I wanted. Page performance is that one that shows us that table of the worst pages. And again, like all the reports, you can share them, you can export them, and so on. So this takes me to the next link here that we're going to show, which is shared reports. Shared reports is listed here. Anytime you want to share one with someone, it'll be listed here. You can always go back to that thing. You can copy that to clipboard. You can open it if you wanted to, see what that report was before you reshare it with someone. By the way, this is what a shared report's going to look like once it loads. There you go. All right, so that's kind of it. A couple more things I want to show, though. And the most important one I want to show is documentation. Documentation is listed here. Now, at the top of this is Tenon training videos. These are training videos on all the topics that I talked about already. They're just broken down. Some of them are a little out of date because we've made some changes to the UI. Those will be updated very soon. Documentation for the test API. This is the new API documentation. Includes a Postman collection. The legacy API content is listed here for documentation, what Tenon tests, so on and so forth. Heartily recommend checking out the changelog for anything. If you've logged a bug with us or something like that, we will always put the status of those things here. Another thing to take note of is known issues. There are some known issues in the tests and in the web UI, and so keep that stuff in mind, especially when it comes to certain tests. You see here that you can turn on and off those tests. We talked about that before, and we tell you which ones those might be, and we explain what the issues might be as well. The support policy is listed here, including what our procedure is for those sorts of things. If you need support, feel free to click on that link that says support at the top. You can either email us directly or you can fill out this form. Either way, it's going to go to our issue tracking system, and we'll get notified of it. So that is it for Tenon basic training. And again, we have advanced training as well. Look for a video of that in the same place where you saw this.